Istagosthi to discuss our Ishta, our beloved Sri Krishna. And so I know many of you have questions, so I want to hear maybe 2, 3, 4 of the questions first, and then we'll decide which one to answer in which order. So first I want to request Mukunda Prabhu, because he's very senior, if you have any question.
So perhaps it's sometimes seen that they will count chapter 35, the coming of Akrura, as another Gita. Some people will count and some people don't, or how does that fit? And as you mentioned the other day, in the Vasikrita verse of Gopi Gita, the last verse, there is a similar verse in that chapter. Vishwajalaja, Ludasmasusaram Govinda Damodara Madhaviti. Is this also similar to that Vasikrita verse that's there?
That is called, Gita is called Viraha Gita. It's not generally included amongst the 5 Gits, but when the Akrura is taking Krishna away from Vrindavan, then Braj Gopis, what they're saying to each other, beginning from Ov Datas Tavanakutijaya. Samyoja Maitra Pranayena Dehinam Tangsakrita Kam Vionam Shafat Kam Vikritam Terabakachastitam Krita. From that verse up to Govinda Damodar Madhaveti, that is considered to be Viraha Gita. Actually, I have a book of lectures on that. I don't know if it's available actually in English. At least in Russian it was published, Viraha Gita. So, this is not included in 5 Gits, the 5 main Gits, but it's still called a Gita. Yeah. And there was another part of the question?
That verse with Govinda Vishwajalaja Ludasmasusaram, Govinda Damodamarati, like you explained, that the Sujata verse is a special revealing. So the Pratyam Mukata is there normally, that verse exceeds it because so this same verse, Govinda Damodamarati, because
yes, it can be seen like that. There are different circumstances. As a general rule, the heroine should not make advances to the hero. The hero can make advances towards the heroine, but the heroine should not make advances towards the hero. The rasabas dosh will come. But there are under circumstances where it may happen. So, for example, in Yatte Sujata Charnagurham Staneshwar, in the verse you're mentioning, due to the intensity of the bhav, then there's no rasabas. Or we can say, we mentioned in regard to Pranay Gita, the verse in Changanastwa Dadaramrita. Or Sincha means you should extinguish. So it's an imperative. And it's the first word of the verse. So there's extreme stress. Sincha, extinguish. Anganastwa Dadaramrita Purakena, with a flood of nectar of your lips. The fire in our hearts. So that would technically, to say that in ordinary circumstances would be rasa bas dosh. However, in that moment, Radhika is in a state of unmad. And so due to unmad, then, because those kind of words also, they should not be spoken in the presence of others, but other gopis are present. But in that state of unmad, her vivek is destroyed, and she's forgotten that anyone else is there. And so she speaks this. And so in this way, due to the intensity of bhav, it's not rasabasa, even though it would be rasabasa under other circumstances. So actually in Priti Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami, he goes through many examples in Srimad Bhagavatam where it looks like the verse should be rasabasa. And then explains how it's not rasabasa. Like Pradyumna. Pradyumna is Cupid. And it's described how the queens of Dwarka, they saw Pradyumna like Cupid, and say, what is this? He's like their son, or he's literally the son of Rukmini. And so he's like the son to everyone. So this is rasabas. So then Srila Jiva Goswami explains that seeing him, they were reminded of Krishna. And so in this way. So these are examples where there are many places in Srimad Bhagavatam where it looks like rasa vasa, but those who are very rasic can see how the rasa swarup, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Swarup Srimad Bhagavatam is the rasa swarup. It's completely perfect. So there's some rasic, profound rasic meaning why it's not actually rasa vasa dosh. Any other questions? Yes, Prabhu.
I had a question. I know you were discussing yesterday about Srimati Radhika leaving and the Gita was spoken during the time when they all met. So I wondered, is that during the spring Rasa Leela with the southern Siddha Gopis, or is that in the fall, the first day of Kartik with the Siddha Gopis? So one takes place in Braj, the other in Govardhan, the Siddha Gopis in Govardhan. So does that Gita that's spoken at that time when the Gopis meet and they're in distress and with Srimati Radhika's in her distress, and is that they were describing, which one does that take place, or does it take place in both?
The Rasa Leela, which is described in Srimad Bhagavatam, is the Shardiya Rasa. Bhagavan Apitaratri Sharad Utfulla Malika. So in the first verse of the Rasa Leela, it's mentioned it's the Sharad season, the autumn season. The Vasantik Rasa is described in Gita Govinda. And they're somewhat different. In the Shardiya Rasa, Sri Krishna leaves the Rasa Leela with Radhika, and then after some time he also leaves Radhika. But in the Vasantik Rasa Leela, Krishna starts the Rasa Leela with the other gopis before Radhika arrives, and when Radhika arrives and sees that he started without her, then she leaves him, and he's searching everywhere for her. So, in the Ramananda Samvad, Mahaprabhu asked Ramananda Rai to explain everything but giving praman from Shastra. So Ramananda Rai said that Radhika is supreme of all gopis, and he gave the praman from Shastra, Anaya Radhito Nunam Bhagavan Hari Ishwaraya Novihai Govinda Prito Yamanaya, that when the gopis were searching for Krishna, they found his footprints, but then they found Radhika's footprints next to him. Then they said, oh, this gopi is the most fortunate. And when Mahaprabhu heard this, he said, this doesn't prove that Radhika is the most dear to Krishna. And the reason is that he disappeared with Radhika secretly. No one saw it happen. So no one knew actually at that time with whom he disappeared until they found the footprints. So Mahaprabhu said, the question comes, why did Krishna disappear with her secretly? It could be that he loves another gopi more and he didn't want to offend her, that's why he took Radhika secretly, not openly. So this does not make the case so strongly. So then Ramananda Rai, he said, Kangsari api samsara vasana pada sankala radha arya hridaya chajabraja sundari. That he gave the example from Gita Govinda, from the springtime Rasa Leela, that right there, when Radhika came and saw he'd already begun the Rasa Leela, and Radhika left, now Krishna's sitting, with all the gopis around him, all serving him, and right there in front of everyone's eyes, he got up and left to try to find Radhika. So then Ramananda Rai quotes the verse, Itastitastam anusutya radhikam Anangabana Branakinna Manasa Kritanutata Sakalinda Nandini Tatantakunjay Vishisada Madhava. Then Krishna, he was searching from kunj to kunj, Itastatastam anusutya radhikam, trying to find Radhika. Finally he was so overwhelmed with regret of what he'd done that he sat down in a kunj and he began to lament. And then his lamentations and his different spurtis, different kinds of spurtis of Radhika in separation, they begin to unfold. Mamyam Chalita Vilokya Britam Baduni Chayena Sapuradhatayamapi Krishna's saying, Hari Hari Taranataya Gata Sakupiteva Hari Hari, oh God, what have I done? He's not talking to himself, because he's a cowboy, he's talking to God. Hari Hari, oh God, what have I done? I made an offense to Radhika, and now she became upset and she has left me. When will I see her again? And he's crying in this way. So this very beautiful pastime. Once there was a sabha, a Dharma sabha, a religious assembly. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was there, and one person was giving a guitar. And he was speaking about the Rasa Lila in Vrindavan, which is described in Srimad Bhagavatam as Shardiya Rasa. And the moment when Sri Krishna disappeared from Radhika, then Radhika said, Ha Nata Ramana Preshta Kwasi Mahapuja Dasiste Kripanane Sakye Dasya Sangitim. And this devotee said this verse. At that moment, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was so overwhelmed with the pain of Radhika's separation, he could not tolerate it. Because he is Nayanamani Manjari. So he feels everything that Radhika is feeling. So he cannot tolerate that Krishna has left Radhika and Radhika is fainting in separation. And at once, without any calculation, without thinking, against his volition even, just out of ecstasy, he stood up and said, don't say that, say, Itastatastam manasritya Radhikam. This verse. That Radhika has left Krishna and Krishna is going here and there and crying in separation from Radhika. So these are some of the differences between the two. Bhagavatam is Shardiya Rasa, Gita Govindra is Vasantik Rasa. Then, yes, I believe you have a question.
Well, my question was about Jiva-Tattva, this controversial topic that's been going around. I just wanted to clarify a little more from you, if you can please explain a little bit. So.
Now, you can go into it in depth, but there's also an easy route, just to make you think about the subject. So let's say someone said that the Swarup is not in the Jiva. Right? Just there are different sides, and I'm not against anyone. My approach is reconciliatory. That the two perspectives are correct, but persons on both sides may have some misconceptions. And that's why they're quarreling with each other. There's something missing in the understanding of both sides, that's why they quarrel. Because if each side had a complete picture, actually they wouldn't be on any side, they would be in the reconciliatory position. So, who thinks that the Swarup is in the Jiva? Okay, yeah. Who thinks that the Swarup is not in the Jiva? Okay, good. So let's just say you play that role, that the Swarup is not in the Jiva, then I pose the question to you. If the Swarup is not in the Jiva, where is it?
It's in laughing key behind Gurudev's heart, and he's going to
So, the answer is, Jamik, that the Swarups are in the spiritual. They're in the spiritual world. They're eternally there in the spiritual world. So then I would ask the question, well, just point to the direction where that Swarup is. You say the Swarup is not in the Jiva, it's in the spiritual, just point. When you get it and it comes to you or you go to, which direction does it come from? Point. Where? The north, the south? Where is it?
You didn't bring Radha Ramanji to point.
No, because I'm not speaking, I wasn't anticipating that I would speak Rasakatha today. So I told him before I left, I said, there's no Rasakatha today, so don't worry, you won't miss anything. Not Joe, you can ask Daniel. He was there, he overheard me. So, where is it? You see, the thing is that anytime you want to describe transcendental things, spiritual things, everything which is transcendental is Achincha Lakshan. And so when our acharyas describe something, they're faced with the pedagogical challenge. Understand? The pedagogical challenge. It's a challenge how to teach this to a person who has their limited material vision in a way that will be beneficial for them and bring them towards the truth. Because if you just say it's a chintya, then everyone will just be bored and they'll have nothing to speak about and they still won't understand anything. So you have to say something, but as soon as you say something and you try to make it chintya, it's never exactly the truth. Again. So, now, what I'll address first of all is the root of the controversy. The root of it. On one side of the picture, we have statements like Srila Prabhupada's translation of the verse of the Payar of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Satyaka Unai Shravanadi Shuddhachitikaye Udai. And Srila Prabhupada's translation is more of, as often Srila Prabhupada's translations are, they're often more of a bhav anubhad. In other words, they're a translation, but with some purport mixed in as well, to help us understand it, not a literal translation. So his translation is, pure love for God is eternally situated in the hearts of all living entities. It's not something to be gained from another source, and when the heart is purified by hearing and chanting, this love naturally awakens. So then, everyone, generally in the West, they take Srila Prabhupada's translation at face value, and then they conceive in their mind that here's my soul, and if I could open the soul and dig around a little bit, I'll find that there was some praying there just waiting, and it's going to come out when I'm purified by chanting. So generally people would take it like that, but that's not what Srila Prabhupada is exactly saying. But people take it like that. So that's the first thing. Then the next thing, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Jiva-Dharma. So in chapter 15, on discussing Jiva-Tattva, Bhagavad Maharaj says, the Jiva's atomic consciousness is endowed with the quality of knowledge as described by the word aham. He's the enjoyer, he's the thinker, that means he's bhokta, he's mantritva, he's gyatritva, he's the one, gyata, the one who comprehends. He's, the Jiva has an eternal form which is very subtle. Just as the different parts of the gross body, the hands, the legs, the nose, the eyes and so on, combine to manifest a beautiful form when established in their respective places. Similarly, a very beautiful atomic spiritual body is manifest, which is composed of different spiritual parts. So it's very, very specific what he's saying, that the spiritual form has the fingers and toes and everything. And the Jiva has such a spiritual form. So he's saying the Jiva has a form. He didn't say the Jiva is the form, he says he has the form. First thing. And also it's not mentioned here where it is. Okay. Right? You see how many conclusions you can jump to? I just read that sentence and then just pointed out, well, do you see what he said? Okay. Now, then he says, however, when the Jiva is entangled in Maya, that spiritual form is covered by two material bodies. So he's saying, in one sense it's covered, but it's covered by your consciousness. A spiritual thing can't be covered. Your awareness can be covered. Now, another part of Jiva-Dharma, which is very pertinent to this subject, after Brajanath has heard all these explanations from Babaji Maharaj, then Babaji Maharaj will ask him to speak back to him what he's understood. So Brajanath said, I understand that the eternal swarupa of the Jiva to be spiritual. It's atomic in nature. And now he says, and within that swarup is a beautiful body, composed of spiritual limbs. So here it said, the location.
Within.
The location of the swarup. Where it is, it's within. And it's composed of beautiful spiritual limbs. In the conditioned state, that beautiful spiritual body remains covered by the subtle body and the material covering of the Jiv. The material covering of the Jiv Swarup in the form of the Jad Sharya, the gross body, inert body, it causes material transformations. Okay, so I just tried to look at some quotes. One quote from Srila Prabhupada saying Prem is eternally established in the heart. And then two quotes from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur saying the Jiva does have a Swarup, it's beautiful, it has parts, it's a spiritual body, it's minute, it's subtle, and it's somehow in the Jiva. Now, so that's one side that people are familiar with. Now the cause of the argument on the other side. In Priti Sandarbha Anuched 10, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad said, Vaikuntasya Bhagavato Jyotir Anksabhuta Vaikunta Loka Shobharupa Ya Anantamurtayas Tatravartante Tasam Ekayasa Muktasya Ekasya Murti Bhagavata Kriyata. So the meaning is that in the spiritual world, Vaikuntasya Bhagavato, the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, has unlimited spiritual forms. And they are expansions of himself illuminating that world. In other words, here what is being said is their Ananta Roop, Ananta Murti, unlimited forms, and these are Jyotir Anksabhut. They are like particles of light surrounding, they're in the beauty of Vaikuntha. So the form of the Supreme Lord is there, and his planet is his Tadrupa Vaibhav, and around that is a Jyotir Anksabhut, Ananta Murti. Unlimited forms which are like particles of light, which are the beauty decorating his spiritual planet. Okay? So, and then it is said, Tasam, of them, Ekaya Saha, with one among them, Muktasyaika Murti Bhagavata Kriyata. The Supreme Lord makes a liberated soul, he makes the form of a liberated soul with one of those murtis. So when a soul in this world is liberated, then he has a murti, and his murti is one of those forms, which is the Jyotir Anksabhut, the particles of light in Vaikuntha. So, then, another thing. In Paramatma Sandarbha, there's a discussion of, or Bhagavad Sandarbha maybe, there's a discussion of the verse, Ladini Sandini Samvit, Tvaika Savasansai, Ladatapa Kuri Misra Tuino Gunavarjite. Oh my Lord, the three vrittis of Swarup Shakti, Samvit, Ladini and Sandini, you are the shelter of these potencies. They are in you. You are not, there are no gunas in you which cause the mixed happiness and distress. Okay. Now in the commentary to that verse, by Sridhar Swami, the original commentator of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Jiva Goswami quotes that, where he said, Eka Samsara, you are the one shelter of these three vrittis of the Swarup Shakti, na tu Jiva, not the Jiva. So the Jiva is not the shelter of the Samvit and Ladini. Krishna is the shelter of the Samvit and Ladini. So now what I've tried to do, just in the opening of the discussion, is give something of the anatomy of the dispute. The quote of Srila Prabhupada about bhakti is in the heart, and the quotes of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that you have a Swarup and it's in the Jiva somehow, right? And then on the other side, where Srila Jiva Goswami Pad said the Swarups are in Vaikuntha. And that Samvit and Ladini, which is bhakti, is not in the Jiva. Okay? So this is the cause of this is the anatomy of the dispute. Now, I just want to give some quote of the Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur gave a lecture, it was published as an article called Thakur Bhakti Vinod. And it was all about the importance of hearing Shabda Brahma, from a self-realized soul, that that's the only way to realize the truth. And in that lecture he says, first he describes about the glorious contribution of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that he was the first Acharya who has tried to address the empirical objections of the materialists to theism and to the path of bhakti in his books. Because previous Acharyas, mainly they explain on the basis of Shastric evidence. Because they're in a culture where people believe in Shastra, so if you quote Shastra, they'll believe it. But in modern times, many people, they don't have faith. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is trying to address empirical objections in the modern atmosphere. He was faced with the Bengali intelligentsia, the Bhadralok and others who'd been very anglicized, and he was preaching to them in many occasions. So he's saying, there have, however, already arisen serious misunderstandings regarding the proper interpretation of the life and the teachings of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Those who suppose they understand the meaning of his message without securing the guiding grace of the Acharya are disposed to unduly favor the method of empiric study of his writings. You cannot understand the books of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur by reading them. Your own empiric study. So he said, there are persons who have got by heart almost everything that he wrote without being able to catch the least particle of his meaning. Such study cannot benefit those who are not prepared to act up to the instructions lucidly conveyed by his words. There is no honest chance of missing the warnings of Thakur Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Therefore, those who are misled by the perusal of his writings are led astray by their own obstinate perversity in sticking to the empiric course which they prefer to cherish against his explicit warnings. Because Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur always speaks that you have to approach a guru, approach a Vaishnava and surrender, and you have to hear Shabda Brahman from his lips and so on. So let those unfortunate persons look more carefully into their own hearts for the cause of their misfortune. The personal service of a pure devotee is essential for understanding the spiritual meaning of the words of Thakur Bhaktivinoda. So he goes on to say that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur belongs to the category of spiritual world teachers who eternally occupy the superior position. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is not an erring mortal who is just wrote something and made a mistake. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he made a very in-depth study of the Sandarbhas when he was in Jagannath Puri, and he has written in his biography the saints and scholars under whose guidance he studied them also in Puri. And he also made a very elaborate study of the other sampradayas, including the Sri Sampradaya, and a lot of Srila Jiva Goswami's Jiva-Tattva came from, he's quoting from Jamatri Rishi, who's a sadhu in the line of Ramanujacharya. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was thoroughly aware of all the components of this discussion. One thing to consider is that in the introduction of Jiva Dharma, there it is mentioned that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, having studied all the Sandarbhas, is given the essence here in Jiva Dharma. So what happens is, when a conditioned soul tries to understand the truth, even by hearing from Guru, if he's not surrendered, then the Shabda Brahma is not revealed in his heart. And there's Maya Vyavadan. That means Maya, in the form of his own mental vrittis, interferes with the reception of Shabda Brahma. And instead of receiving actual realization, the Anubhav, Darshan, from hearing, what he receives is called Parichena Gyan. Parichena Gyan means limited knowledge or fractions, fragments of knowledge. But the absolute truth is not fragmental, it's non-dual. Vadanti tat-tattva vidas-tattvam yad-gyanam advayam. So the truth is Advaya Gyan. So you cannot know the Advaya Gyan Tattva without yourself being situated beyond duality. So that experience beyond duality is received through Shabda Brahma, but if the person is not surrendered, then his material chitta vrittis intercept the Shabda Brahma and it's refracted and he gets Prachina Gyan, fragmental knowledge, Vikrita Gyan, distorted knowledge, the Sankhyen Gyan which is mixed up with his own Vikalpa, imagination, or Vivartagrasta Gyan, which is the knowledge which is under the control of avidya completely. Like you hear that Krishna's, meeting with the Braj Gopis and you take it, he's a lusty human being who's got lots of girlfriends, that's like a total misunderstanding of everything. Vivartagrasta Gyan. So, here I just read this quote because Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was saying that just after the disappearance of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, already people were misunderstanding many things, especially about Bhajan Pranali, about Ekadas Bhav and Raganuga Bhakti and things like this. So, but what we should understand is that many persons, they read the Sandarbhas and it's a big text and they get a bit of knowledge here, a bit of knowledge there, a bit of knowledge there, but because they're not in Advaya Gyan, they can't put it all together. So what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, being situated on the Transcendental platform, he's studied all the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami and he's put it together and then presented it in the most palatable, in the most accessible, in the most practical way, in Jiva-Dharma. Srila Gurudev always used to say that just as Vyasadeva went in trance, Bhakti Yogena Manasi Samyak Pranihite Malay, and in his trance he received Srimad Bhagavatam and then it was manifest. So in the same way, Jiva-Dharma is coming from the trance of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. We should have this level of the Shraddha, aprakrita, supernatural faith in Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and his writing. So now we come to the subject, the subject of reconciliation. Achintakalu yeba vanata aniskakena yojayat prakritibhya paramyatsjat tadachintasya lakshanam. Everything which is transcendental, which is beyond Prakriti is achintya, that's its characteristic. So we have to bear that in mind. In Bhakti Samrita Sindhu 1145, there Rupa Goswami says, Swapalpa ruchi eva syad bhakti tattva vabodhika. Unless you have at least a little ruchi, that means that you've started to enter into the stage of ruchi beyond nishta, you cannot understand bhakti tattva. So let that be a warning that if you're thinking, yeah, I've understood it, it's all in the categories, I've got it down in exactly defined logical categories, the jiva's over here and his swarups over there, and it's all compartmentalized and it's all very clear and clear-cut lines, and it all fits in with my logical categories. If you're thinking like that, that means you have not understood. You haven't understood it. And we can more or less say, unless a person comes in the stage of ruchi, that means they have some realization of Krishna's form and qualities and associates, then they haven't understood it. So someone can say, well, you have to understand logic, the Shastra through Yukti, Shastra Yukti logic. That's true. But the meaning of Shastra Yukti and not Kevala. Kevala Yukti means, what people say, Kevala Yukti just means your own logic, not depending on Shastra. But if I read the Shastra and then I try to logically analyze what came before, what comes afterwards, and make sure that there's no contradiction, then that's not Kevala Yukti. That's Shastra Yukti. But that's not true. Because the definition of Kevala Yukti is not that you're using your logic without taking help of scripture. The definition of Kevala Yukti is Ruchi Rahita Yukti. Logic without Ruchi. So there are many persons who are saying, yes, but we have to analyze and we've done the analysis and Shastra Yukti is not bad. Yes, Shastra Yukti is not bad. But you should know that Kevala Yukti is bad. But Kevala Yukti doesn't mean that you're not depending on Shastra. You can still be reading Shastra and it's still Kevala Yukti if there's no Ruchi. So in the commentary, Jiva Goswami literally says this yuktis tu kevala ruchi rahita. That the kevala yukti means ruchi rahita yukti. So bhakti-tattva cannot be understood by that. So what I'm trying to express now is that it is a challenge. Don't expect to understand it very easily and immediately. Now, let's discuss the word in. In. It's such a short word. It only has 2 letters. If you ask someone, what does the word in mean? Do you know what the word in means? Everyone will say yes. But actually, this word in is very difficult to understand. Because the truth, the absolute truth is achintya. And what isn't the absolute truth is not simply not the truth. And so any subject you try to study, whether it's linguistics or atomic physics or whatever, it will always lead to puzzlement. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said, the aroha panta, the elevationist approach, that I will elevate myself to an understanding, abhigyatavad, I can understand, arohavad, I will know something from the ascending process, is such that it always leads to puzzlement. That anything that you try, any small thing that you think that you know, you try to study it, and if you go deeper in it, you will actually find that you can't understand it. In Greek philosophy, it's called aporia. Socrates was going around saying, oh, tell me what you know, and then interrogating them with the Socratic alenchus, and in the end showing that really no one knows what they're talking about anything. And they end up in this state of aporia, where it's like both things seem equally plausible and we can't solve the problem. It's a dilemma. So everything is like that, including this word in. And the reason is this. If you study Navya-Nyaya, so there are 2 ways in which something can be in. The main ways. There are other varieties as well, samanya adhikarana, but the 2 main ones is called samyog sambandha and samavaya sambandha. So samyog sambandha means by contact, and samavaya sambandha means by the relationship of inherence. Now the word comes, inherence. So for example, if we have, let's see, oh look, there's a glass vase over there. Are there any flowers in the vase? Can you see? Are there flowers in the vase? Huh? Are there flowers in the vase? By Navya-Nyaya I can prove that there are no flowers in the vase. Why? Because there are flowers in the vase by samyog sambandha, by contact. Because someone has put the flowers in the vase and the flowers are contacting the vase. But by samavaya sambandha, there are no flowers in the vase. By inherence, because the vase is made of glass. So when the vase maker took the glass and melted it, he didn't throw some flowers in the mix to make the vase. So there's no flowers in the vase, inherent in the glass of the vase. So there are 2 ways in things can be in. Samyog sambandha, by contact, or by samavaya sambandha, it's actually there in the object. In the substance of the object, as an ingredient cause, let's say as a upadan karan. You understand upadan karan? What is the house made of? Made of bricks. So the bricks are the upadan karan of the house. So you can say there are bricks in the house. Okay? They're there, they're inherently there because that's what it's made of. Okay? So the samavaya sambandha, according to logic, is of so many different types. Dharma and dharmin. That which has a dharma, the property holder and its property. So dharma and dharmin. Guna and guni. The quality, the attribute, and the substance. Adeya adhara. The located and the location. Adeya adhara sambandha. Kriya and kriyavan, the action and the person who's doing the action. Jati and Vyakti. Jati means the universal. You know, in philosophy, Jati, universal. The universal and the particular instantiation of that universal. For example, there's the universal apple. And when you see, you know, a green round thing that fell off a tree, you say this is an apple. That means there's a universal called apple, but this is a particular instantiation of that universal apple. So if you see 3, 4 apples, then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual instantiations of the universal, the Jati apple is present in there. So realists, philosophers believe that Jati is real. It's not just like a mental category, it's not a conception, but the Jatis themselves are real and they exist, they're all pervading everywhere and eternal, and they just become instantiated in their particulars. So like Plato is realist and Nyaya, the Nyaya of the school is also a realist philosophy. Okay. So then also Avyayi and Avayava. Avayava means a part and Avayavin means the whole. So the relationship between a part and a whole is also a samavai, type of samavai sambandha. Vishesh and nitya dravya, between particularity and an internal substance. Visheshana and Vishesha, between the qualifier and the qualificand. It's called Visheshan and Vishesha, the adjective and the noun. So these are the different categories of samavai sambandha or inherent relationship. One thing you should know also, the samyog sambandha, relationship by contact, is between two substances. The flowers are one substance, the vase is another, so yeah. But the relationship of inherent samavai sambandha is these types of relationships between a property, an attribute and its substance. Not between two substances, a property and its substance, a part and the whole. And also the samavai sambandha is eternal. It's not something that can be made. So as long as that object exists, its relationships with its attributes it's eternal in the sense that it's as long as the object itself exists. Okay. So those are two things to think about between samyoga and samavai sambandha. Now, in logic, Nyaya Sutras of Gautam Rishi, those categories are there, but the opponents of the logic school, they trashed Nyaya. Said no, there's a fault in this Nyaya philosophy, and you can see in the second part of Vedanta Sutra that the Nyaya of Gautam Rishi has been rejected because there's several faults, but one of the faults is that the samavai sambandha is a vikalpa. Inherent sambandha of Nyaya is imaginary, and the reason you're given is this: if you make a schema of it, let's say you've got a dharma, which is like a shakti and a shaktiman. A dharma and dharmi. They are related by samavai sambandha, inherence. So if you draw a box here and put dharma, that's the shakti is the dharma, and you draw another box here and put dharmin, the shaktiman here. Now they're related, draw a line between them, they're related to each other by samavai sambandha. Now in Nyaya, samavai sambandha is a padartha. That means it's actually a thing. It's a thing that exists. Right? And so the dharma is linked to the dharmi by something called samavai sambandha, the relationship of inherence. So it's not just a concept, it's actually among the padarthas like, substance, quality, absence and so on. So one padartha that exists is samavai sambandha. So it's there. So then the question will come, what's the relationship between samavai sambandha and the dharmi? Or between samavai sambandha? Because in order for samavai sambandha to join the dharma to the dharmi, it itself has to have a relationship with both of them. I could actually explain going to the subject very, very quickly, but I'm just playing around a little bit to give some insight in when you go into the subject. Not everything's as clear as you think. So, what's the relationship between this Pradartha, Samavaya, Sambandha and each of the two aspects which are related to each other? So then you'll have to say, well, the Samavaya Sambandha is inherent in the Dharma, or it's inherent in the Dharmi. So that's another Samavaya Sambandha. So this Samavaya Sambandha needs another box in the middle, another Samavaya Sambandha, to relate the Pradartha Samavaya Sambandha with the Dharma or with the Dharmi. But then when you inject another Samavaya Sambandha, then the question is, well, how is that related to the Dharma and Dharmi? And then you have to inject another one and another one and another one, and it becomes infinite regression, which is in Sanskrit called Anavasta Dosh.
Yeah.
Anavasta Dosh. That's in relation to?
He says that there's one of the faults when he's going through the different kinds of praman,
Mm-hmm.
and he says one is anavashta dosh.
Yeah.
You can't come to a conclusion.
You cannot make a presentation which has infinite regression in it. So that's called Anavasta Dosh. So Anavasta Dosh comes in. So what happened was, because the school of Gautam Rishi got trashed by opponents, so then later in the Middle Ages there was this who wrote the Diti. He composed Navya Nyaya. That's why Navya Nyaya came about. Before Mahaprabhu, and then it was Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya brought it from Mathila to Navadvip, and so then Navadvip became the main center of Navya Nyaya before Mahaprabhu appeared. Then Mahaprabhu came and he had his pastimes. So maybe in New York, no, in Navadvip I'll give a class on this. Mahaprabhu's Navya Nyaya Lila. So anyway, so Navya Nyaya they had to come up with a new Sambandha to stop this fault within the philosophy of Nyaya, other their school will be demolished. So they came up with a new Sambandha, it's called Swarup Sambandha. So the relationship between Samavaya Sambandha and the Dharma or the Dharmi is Swarup Sambandha. That's called a self-linking relationship, Swarup Sambandha, in which the Sambandha is identical. It's identical. It's tadatma with the thing that it's relating. So this Samavaya Sambandha has a Swarup Sambandha with the Dharma. It's identical to it, so it doesn't require any further explanation. So then some more attacks came. If the Samavaya Sambandha is identical to the Dharma, but then it's related to the Dharmi also by Swarup Sambandha on the other side. So it's identical to that. So two things which are identical to the same thing are identical with each other. So by introducing Swarup Sambandha, you end up collapsing all the categories of Nyaya. They all totally collapse. So on the one hand, Navya Nyaya was an attempt to improve Nyaya. But if you look at it deeply, it actually demolished Nyaya, so there was nothing left whatsoever. And this is why Mahaprabhu, he wrote a commentary on Navya Nyaya, but he was crossing the boat with Raghunath. He wrote a commentary on Navya Nyaya. What's his name? Raghunath Shiromani, I think his name was. And he was a college friend of Mahaprabhu. And Raghunath said to Mahaprabhu that, the original Navya Nyaya was not by Raghunath, it was by another person. Raghunath was the commentator, the main commentator who wrote the Diti commentary on Navya Nyaya. So he was crossing the river with Mahaprabhu when they were both students. And that young Raghunath, he said, "Oh, Nimai, I've written a commentary on Navya Nyaya. Do you want to see?" Mahaprabhu said, "Oh, really? That's a coincidence, because I've also written a commentary on Navya Nyaya. You want to see mine?" So they said, "Yes, okay." So then they exchanged commentaries to each other. And then they were reading, and Raghunath was reading, and he just started to cry. Mahaprabhu said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I worked so hard writing my commentary. But now I'm reading yours, it's so beautiful. No one will ever read mine." Mahaprabhu said, "Really? Is that all?" And so then Mahaprabhu said, "Give me that." And he took his own commentary back, wrapped it up, and he threw it in the Ganga forever and gone. And in that commentary that was useless compared to his, that's the one that became famous. That's the great famous commentary, so much so that the history of Nalini is divided into two periods. The pre-Raghunath period and the post-Raghunath period. So you can just imagine what Mahaprabhu's commentary was like when he threw it in the Ganges. So in Jiva-Dharma, the logician Prayojan, right? He's dreaming at night, oh, I wish I could find the lost commentary of Nimai Pandit. You know, that's what he's thinking about all the time. And by thinking Nimai, then he gets the mercy and meets with Vaishnavas and he becomes a Vaishnava himself. So, anyway, so Mahaprabhu threw this commentary in the Ganga, and the reason is that there's a way in which you can completely demolish the entire Navya school. It's like self-implodes. And that's why Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur says, the aroha apanta always leads to puzzlement. Such a beautiful phrase. I gave a class on this, aroha panta and the puzzlement of aroha panta.
Yeah.
Did you hear it? On the first day in Miami. Yeah. So you can hear that if you want to. Study about aroha panta, very fascinating subject. Okay, so what we're discussing here is that just the concept of inherence itself within Nyaya is, you know, it's not a legitimate concept, so it's been rejected in Vedanta Sutra, in Baladevi Debushan's commentary. So, when those who are, let's say, opponents of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur say, you say it's inherent in the jiva, they say no, it's not inherent. And anyway, inherence is also, it's not a legitimate relationship according to Nyaya. So they'll reject inherence because they're thinking of the word samavaya, inherence, in terms of logic. So they're bound to reject Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's perspective because that in our tradition it's not accepted as an authentic, legitimate relationship. So, now, that was a little bit of a digression just to look at how the subject matter itself of inherence, just the meaning of the word in, is quite complicated. What does it mean in? Samyog, Sambandha, Samavaya, these are logical categories. But there's a way in which something can be in something which does not fit into the logical categories. Something can be located in something else, but not according to logical categories. And this is why when Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said the Swarup is in the Jiva, Bhakti is in the Jiva, people can't accept it because they're using logical categories, but this is a trans-rational type of locatedness. It's a trans-rational type of locatedness. So it's very hard. Devotees who support Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur often kind of struggle how to articulate it. Even if someone understands it, it's very difficult to articulate. So, now, let's come to the subject of reconciliation. Reconciling the two positions. So, I am suggesting that there are two ways in which it can be reconciled. In the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there it says, Shabda Brahma Param Brahma Mamobe Shashvati Tanu. Krishna said, I have two eternal bodies. Mamobe Shashvati Tanu. Of me, there are two eternal bodies. Shashvati Tanu. What are they? Shabda Brahma and Param Brahma. His own body is the Param Brahma, is here. And he has another body that is Shabda Brahma. His sound form. So, let's look at this subject of the Swarupa of the Jiva and so on from the perspective of Krishna as Parabrahma and then as Shabda Brahma. So first of all, Priti Sandarbha says that the Swarups of the Jivas are actually Krishna's murtis. They're Krishna's own murtis. Right? It says, Ananta Murtaya Jyotirang Sabut. In Vaikuntha, surrounding the Supreme Lord, His own Ananta Murtis are everywhere. So, these forms, these parikar swarups, are the Vaibhav of Krishna's own swarup. And therefore, the relationship that Krishna has with the living entity, with the jiva, and the relationship that the swarup, the jiva has with that swarup. Let's just say, hypothetically, if you're taking that point of view, not what seems like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's point of view, but the way that people understand Jiva Goswami, you say that the swarup is in Vaikuntha. So because that's actually one murti of Krishna, so the relationship that Krishna's swarup has with the jiva is the same relationship that the jiva swarup has with the jiva. In the sense that that parikar swarup, it's part of Krishna's swarup. Is that clear to you? Because the parikar swarup is actually part of Krishna's swarup, if we can establish what the relationship is between Krishna's swarup and the jiva, if we can articulate it, then it will be the same between the jiva and that parikar swarup, because that's part of Krishna's swarup. Okay, so what's the relationship of Krishna's swarup with other things? Now in Bhagavad Gita, as you know, Krishna says, Maya tatamidam sarvam jagata vyakta murtina matstani sarvabhutani nam na chaham teshtavastita. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. Then he says, Nacha matstani bhutani. And all living beings are not in me. Pashyame yogamaishram. Just see my mystic opulence. So Krishna is saying that all the living beings are in him. Then he says, and they're also not in me. And then he says, see my mystic opulence. So, now the next verse is really, Krishna is trying to now give an example. Because there's no logical category that explains, is Krishna in us or not in us? Are we in Krishna or not in Krishna? Jiva Goswami gives a phrase in Paramatma Sandarbha that living entity is vyakt, he is pervaded by Paramatma, and that the Jiva and Paramatma actually interpenetrate each other. So it's an inconceivable relationship. It's not, the relationship between the Jiva and Paramatma is not a samyog sambandha. It's not that one is over here and one is over there and someone joined the two together. And it's not samavai sambandha by the logical category, because we've already shown that if you analyze inherence, the logical category of inherence, the whole thing falls apart. And even if you introduce Swarup Sambandha by Navanyaya, then it falls apart even worse. So how do you define this relationship between the soul, the soul and God? It's very difficult to express it. So, now in 9.6, Krishna says, Yataka shastito nityam vayosama savaktago mahan tata sarvani bhutani matstani chupadaraya. Ityupadaraya. That means upadaraya means you try to understand it. So if you read the commentary of Vishwanath Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur on this, it's very, very funny. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says, Krishna is saying that actually you can't understand it. But I'm giving you some example to give you some idea. You try, but you won't be able to understand it by logic, because it's not a logical category. So here's the example that Krishna is giving. He says, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, so all created beings rest in me. Right? Now think of that. It's a very good example. As the wind exists and it's blowing everywhere, but what does it exist in? In space, Akash. It exists in Akash. But is it really touching the Akash? Is it in the Akash? Is the Akash affected by it at all?
No.
No. So here, the wind is in the Akash, but it's also in one sense not in the Akash, because they're not actually associating, they're asanga. So Vishwanath Thakur, he uses the phrase asanga stita. Asanga stita means situated but not associating. In other words, it's located but it's not associating. Okay, he's trying. So there's a way in which something can be there, and from another perspective you can say it's not there, but it's actually located there, but not associated. You understand? This is the relationship. So, Sridhar Swami, in his commentary, he gives a wonderful phrase. He uses the phrase, asamslishta, ada adeya sambandha. Now he's actually using a sambandha. Asamslishta, ada adeya sambandha. So adar, adeya means the located, and adar means the location. Now in Navya-Nyaya, the adar adeya sambandha is one type of inherence in Navya-Nyaya. And so it's technically, Sridhar Swami saying the relation here is one of inherence, but it's a special, it's not a type of inherence which is among the logical categories. It's called asam shlishta. Shlishta means embracing. When two things are embracing, they're touching each other, or they're affecting each other, or samshlishta, completely embracing, they become one. So it's asamshlishta, ada adeya sambandha. The relationship of the located and the locus in which there's no contact, but they're still located. Is that clear? Ish?
Is everybody clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So just like the wind is located, the wind is located in the Akash, but at the same time, it's located but not related in a certain sense, not touching in any way. Yeah? So that's called asam slish adar adeya sambandha. But adar adeya sambandha in logic is actually called inherence. But this is not one of the categories of logic, because it's a relationship between transcendental being, the Supreme Lord, and the material world, and also the jivas. It's the same. So Vishnu Chaitanya in his commentary he says akasho pi vayostito pi. Although the akash is situated in the air, nastito asangatvat. It's also not situated because it's not affected by it. It's asanga. So this is so the relationship between Jiva and the Bhagavan, and because the Swarup of the Jiva is Bhagavan's, it's a part of Bhagavan's Swarup, it's one of his murtis. So the relation between the Jiva and Bhagavan that will be the same as between Jiva and his Swarup, right? So now you've got this situation. Now you have this situation where, and the Sandarbhas say that the Jivas are Paramatma Vaibhava. They're the Vaibhava, the expanded murtis of the Paramatma. And in Priti Sandarbha, the Swarups are in the spiritual world, and they're the Vaibhava of Bhagavan in the spiritual world. Right? So if you can imagine it, and sometimes the Vedas say like sparks in a fire. So we can say, here's Bhagavan in the spiritual world like a fire, and all the Swarups are like these Jota Angsabhut, the murtis are all around him. Right? And over here, here's Paramatma, and like sparks of the fire, all the jivas have come from him. Right? And what you have to do is, this jiva has to attain that swarup. Right? But the problem is that Bhagavan actually isn't over there and Paramatma isn't over there. Is it?
Right.
Is it? You can talk about Paramatma being something separate from Bhagavan, but that's just your talk. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yad jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabhyate. There's only one truth, and that's Bhagavan. But if you see Bhagavan in a limited way, to a limited degree, first if you have the nirvikalpika pratyaksh, the nirvikalpika pratyaksh of Bhagavan, that means seeing Bhagavan but not making any contact with his qualities, that's called Brahman realization. And it comes about by the influence of Sambit Shakti. Now, if you see Bhagavan by the influence of Sambit and Sandini together, then you don't see Bhagavan, but you see, oh, this is Paramatma. It's actually Bhagavan, but you're seeing him with upadhis. So there are three levels of upadhi. Sridhar Swami quotes a verse. Sridhar Swami quotes a verse from one of the Puranas. And it says basically that there are three levels of upadhi. Virat, Hiranyagarbha and Karan. Virat means the gross elements of the physical world, the universe. Hiranyagarbha means the subtle elements. And Karan means the most subtle cause of the material elements. So when you see Bhagavan with the upadhi of the Virat, the gross elements, then that's Kiradakashai Vishnu, the Paramatma. When you see Bhagavan with the upadhi of the subtle elements, Hiranyagarbha, that is Garbhodakashai Vishnu. And when you see Bhagavan with the upadhi of Karan, the subtle cause of the material elements, it's Karanakashai Vishnu. So Paramatma is also one, right? These three Vishnus, but it's the experience of the same Paramatma with different degrees of upadhi. But when you see that truth without any upadhis, that's Bhagavan. That's Bhagavan. You see? So Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Thakur here said that the experience, the perception of Brahman, the darshan of Brahman, is asampurna darshan, incomplete darshan. The darshan of Paramatma is khanda darshan. It is a divided darshan. Because actually Jiva Swarupa Krishna Nitya Das. You have no eternal relationship with Paramatma. Jiva is related to Krishna. But you're not seeing that you're related to Krishna when you have darshan of Paramatma. It's a khanda darshan. It's a divided, the reality is still divided. In one sense. And it's also divided because khanda darshan or parichinna darshan means that you are seeing the division of time, past, present and future. You see? Because Paramatma's Leela is only in relation to the creation of the material world. And his Kriya Shakti by which he creates is time, which is divided into past, present and future. But Nityakal has no divisions. So the darshan of Paramatma is it's called a khanda darshan, a divided darshan. But when all those parties, sarvopadi vinirmuktam, then the absolute truth is only Bhagavan. Vishnu Thakur gives the example from Shishupal Bhatt, you know, the great poet by the poem Magh, by the poet Magh. He wrote Shishupal Bhatt. And there it's described how Krishna was in Dwarka and he saw a light in the sky. And then this light got closer and closer. He saw there was a form in it, but it was not clear to him. And then when it came down and landed, he saw it's Narad Muni. Now the truth of the matter was, it was always Narad Muni. Wasn't anything else, it was just Narad Muni. But it was experienced as a light, then it was experienced as a nondescript, indistinct, vague form, and then it was experienced as Narad Muni. So in the same way, there's only one truth, that's Bhagavan, Krishna. But the khanda darshan of Bhagavan, it's a limited kind of darshan. So that's what I'm saying, that you get parischinna gyan if you read the sandarbhas one by one, but you can't put them all together. Because the description of Jiva-Tattva is given in Paramatma Sandarbha, and it's all analyzed in the relationship between Atma and Paramatma in order to prove that Mayavad is wrong. You see? The purpose of the discussion there is to show that the Jiva and Paramatma are not the same one truth, in the sense that the Jiva and Brahma is one. That there's differences between them. And the Jiva has his own eternal Bhoktritva, Kartritva, Mantritva, all of these qualities, Sheshatva and so on. But that discussion, it's not a total discussion because it's a contextual discussion. So it does not cover all of the possible aspects of Jiva-Tattva. But then you can read it. I read everything that Jiva Goswami said about Jiva-Tattva. Like that. But you have a khanda darshan at the most. If you're actually seeing Paramatma in darshan. And if you're not seeing Paramatma, you're not even having the khanda darshan. Right? So now, coming back to our point, here's Bhagavan in the spiritual world, like sparks, all the murtis are there, the Parakaswarups. And here's Paramatma over here, and all the Paramatma Vaibhava, all the Jivas have come. But the truth of the matter is, they're not over here and over there, they're the same thing. They're the same thing. So, the question comes, do those Paramatma Vaibhavas have a fixed or allocated relationship with the Bhagavan's Vaibhavas? With the Parakaswarups? So those who say that the Jiva doesn't have a Swarup, what they're essentially saying is that those swarups kind of come out of the Paramatma, and it's like a lottery. It's not. It hasn't been decided yet which swarup they're going to get over there. Of course, over there. That's why the first question I asked you. Okay, if your swarup's in Vaikuntha, when you get your swarup, just point to the direction it's coming from. Right? Because the whole idea is one type of kanda or division is time, and another division is space. You see? So the transcendental substances, they're not divided by space, so they're all pervading. All the transcendental things are all pervading. So where is Vaikuntha? Is it there? Yeah, of course it's there, but it's also there. Where is Bhagavad Sarup? Is it there? Yeah, it's also there. Where is the Vaikuntha Murti? The Parakasarup, is it there? It's also there. Right? But when we're thinking with our mind, which is become, has a kanda darshan, divided darshan, and we divide time and space, then we imagine all of these categories and separations which don't exist. So, but there's a way in which they exist. So we've used this word, or rather Sridhar Swami used this word, the asamslishta adar adeya sambandha, the relationship between the located and the locus in which there's no contact. But it's still there. It's still a word for the, it still can be, you can substitute that phrase with the word in. Right? The asamslista adeya sambandha, you still say, you can say in colloquial language, you just say it's in. But it's not in the way that coconut milk is in a coconut. It's not in the way that butter is in milk. You see? The milk in a coconut is an upadankaran. It's an ingredient cause of the coconut. So when we say Krishna's in the heart, he's not the direct ingredient cause of the jiva.
Right.
Or the swarup of the jiva. It's not a direct, it's not that you can cut open the jiva and pull his swarup out. If you say that butter is in milk, the actual molecules which make up the butter and which make up the milk are the same thing. Right? So it's there as an ingredient cause. So we can say it's inherent and it's in. But this locatedness is not that kind of in. It's not that kind of in. And so that's the fault on the part of many of the followers of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That many devotees are thinking, oh, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said the swarup's in the jiva, but they're thinking it's in the jiva like milk in a coconut. Right? And that's where the other side have an argument with them. You see? And the other side are right. The other side is right. They're, you know, if you misunderstand Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and think that the swarup is there as a constituent ingredient, as an upadankaran of the jiva, then you are wrong. And they're correcting you. But you've misunderstood Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And so then what usually happens is that, well, I'm just going to stick with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and forget that. Or the person says Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is either wrong, or they try to respect him by saying, well, it was a preaching tactic, and then they move on to the other side. But the reason they're on the other side is because they misunderstood Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Not that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is wrong. You see, this is not Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's problem. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has no problem with Jiva Goswami. You have not, and it's your problem. Not Bhaktivinoda Thakur's problem. Okay. So, now, when the question comes, we've established that in terms of locatedness, the Swarupa Jiva is there by locatedness. Right? There's no doubt about it. But then one could come up with the argument that, yeah, okay, it's located there because the transcendental things are all pervading and so on. And it has this locatedness even though it's not touching or connected. But you could say that about all the Swarups. Right? You could say, well, your Swarups, okay, if you convince me that your Swarup's there, but all the Swarups are there, so it's a trivial point. It's not important. It's trivial. It's not important. Because all the Swarups, by that token, you could say every single millions of those unlimited Swarups, they're all there. So what's the point in saying the Jiva has his own Swarup? You see? So then the question comes, is regard to time. Because time is that which makes the Kanda Darshan.
Yes.
Time is the Kriya Shakti of Paramatma. It's still part of that Paramatma Tattva where you're not going beyond all upadhis. Now, if the Swarup of the Jiva were fixed, then even though you can say as a trivial point that all the Swarups are there, the fact that others are there that is trivial, it's not important. Only the fact that that one Swarup that you will attain is there, that's the only important thing, because you're not going to realize the others. Yeah? You're never going to realize the others if your Swarup is fixed. So those who are from on the other side, they basically say the Swarup isn't fit. It depends on the association you have and this and that, this and that. But that's looking from within the perspective of material time. Now Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita 7:26, Vedaham samatitani vatamani charjuna bhavishyani tabhutani mamtu veda nakastina. Hey Arjun, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Hey Arjun, I know everything that happened in the past, in the present and the future. And I know all beings, but no one knows me. So the question comes, does Krishna know what Swarup you're going to attain?
Of course, yes.
Of course.
Of course. He said, I know past, present and future. He knows everything. Now, someone wrote a book and they try to say, well, Krishna in Braj, he doesn't know he's Mukta, and if he's Sarvagya, if he knows something, he just knows, like his devotees in the world who are doing Raganuga Bhakti, that he can hear their prayers. But this is not true. When Srila Vishnu Thakur says Krishna is Sarvagya and Mukta, that means he's completely Mukta, but he's also completely Sarvagya. Because Krishna is Swayamrup, is the original form. And the definition of Swayamrup is that form from which all other forms get their Aishwarya and their Madhurya. So, if there's some knowledge which is not in Krishna, no other form, if you say, well, Paramatma knows, but Krishna doesn't know in Vrindavan, or Narayan knows, but Krishna doesn't know in Vrindavan, then where did that Narayan get that knowledge from? Because the Swayamrup is the original form from which everyone gets everything. And you've also done this Kanda Darshan again, you've divided two things. Because these other forms actually aren't different. They're only different according to Rasa Tattva. But actually in Tattva they're not different. Advaita, Achyuta, Anadim, Ananta Rupa. So, Krishna has his form as a cowherd boy who doesn't know anything. In another Prakash he has his form where he doesn't know anything, but he hears the prayers of the devotees who are doing Raganuga Bhakti in the material world, so he can relate. And he has another form where he's totally omniscient of everything. And if he wasn't, then no one else would be omniscient. Would have the possibility. So anyway, Krishna knows. Even if you just say the Paramatma knows. He knows past, present and future also. So he also knows, even though he's not related to the Braja Leela. So anyway, okay, so if anyone knows, it's fixed. Right? Just theoretically. If you admit, if anyone knows, we take that Krishna knows everything because he's Swayamrup. But if you'll admit that if anyone knows, as Krishna said here in the Bhagavad Gita, then what Swarup you will attain is fixed. And even though from within the purview of material time, it looks like the choices that we make and the choices that the sadhus that we make leads us to one particular Swarup, and it's all depending on that. It isn't really. It isn't really. It's fixed. And so that's part of the Inchincha Shakti of God, that God can fulfill a fixed objective through independent choices of Swatantra beings. Beings who have, like pure devotees, have Swatantrata. They have independence. Bhakti is independent. And so on the basis of pure devotees being independent and Bhakti being independent, they try to say, so that's what decides what's going to have what Swarup you will have. Right? So it's not fixed, but that's not true. Krishna can attain fixed goals through others' independence. They say, well, how can he do that? I say, well, he's God. That's what it means to be God. Agatana Gatana Pratiyasi Shakti, to make the impossible possible. So now we have the situation where the Swarups in the spiritual world are actually here, but not mixed. So they're in, but not touching. So they're there, and your Swarup is also fixed, who you're going to be. Right? And when you remove the influence of time, then that's your Swarup. So we can say the Swarup is in the Jiva, and also it's fixed. So now Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teaching, and Srila Jiva Goswami's teaching starts to look like exactly the same teaching, just expressed in different ways. Now, there's an interesting thing to consider. When Bhagavan expands, there's always a correlation. Because one of the arguments is that these forms, these jivas who come from Paramatma, are not correlated to these forms in the spiritual world. It's like random, and the Vaishnava that comes in between you will decide which jiva gets allocated to which swarup. Right? Now we've already shown that that's not true because Krishna knows it's fixed. Right? But what we can also say is, whenever Krishna expands, there's always correlations. For example, Krishna and Balaram are there in Vrindavan, then in Dwarka, there Krishna and Balaram in Dwarka, or in Mathura. And so then they become Krishna, Balaram, Prayojan and Aniruddha in Dwarka, and then they expand and become Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Prayojan and Aniruddha in Vaikuntha. Like this is it. So when Krishna expands and his chapter view expand, they always have their correlative form on the next level down. And that's true for all their associates as well. I mean, let's say, take Radhika for example. Radhika is Radhika, then in Dwarka she becomes Rukmini, and then she becomes Lakshmi, and then her shadow in the material world is Durga. It's her Chaya, her shadow. So there's correlation in the Supreme Lord and the Shaktis, and all the Parikas as well. You have in Braj Madhumangal. Madhumangal in Vaikuntha is Narad Muni. Yeah, like this. You have Sridham. Sridham in Braj is there, but then Sridham in Vaikuntha is Garuda. So Krishna, his Shaktis and all his Parikas, when they expand, there's always a correlation in the different realms. So you can consider, when Krishna becomes, because it never happens, it's eternal, Krishna has all these murtis, which are his Vaibhav. Now that very Krishna is Paramatma, and he's got his Vaibhav. You think there's no correlation between that Vaibhav and that Vaibhav? This is just a logical point of trying to see the big picture of everything. Every time the Lord expands, and all his Vaibhavs, his Parikas are also called Tadrupa Vaibhava, right? The whole spiritual world and all this, they're all called Tadrupa Vaibhava. So, and the jivas are called Paramatma Vaibhav. So we see that in every level, there's a correlation. So you think there's no correlation between these jivas and those swarups? So we know eternally that they're going to get, it's fixed, what they're going to attain. And so, now let's speak about Dharma. What does Dharma mean? Dharma, really theologically in English, we would say teleology. Yeah, you know, in purpose, yeah, teleology. Just like in Greek philosophy, you have the formal cause, the cause of something's form, the ingredient cause, the instrumental cause, and the teleological cause, the final cause, what is it for? In other words, its very existence points towards a particular goal. So that's called artha. That's called artha. You have four purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These are the four, and then you have pancham purushartha. So the panchama purushartha, artha means purpose, right? The panchama purushartha, the fifth purpose is prem. And so that's Jiva Dharma. So when we say bhakti is the dharma of the jiva, doesn't mean that bhakti is in the jiva like milk in a coconut. It means that bhakti is the dharma, it's the intrinsic teleology of the jiva. That means it's his purpose. In other words, he exists especially for that. So now we have a situation where you have a jiva. All the swarups can be there, you can say, but his swarup is there and it's not trivial, because as soon as you remove the upadhi of time, that's who he is. He attains that swarup and it's fixed. And he exists for that, that's his dharma as well. So now everything's Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, if it's seen in the correct light, it doesn't contradict at all anything that Srila Jiva Goswami is saying. But rather, it's you begin to appreciate it in a beautiful sense, that all the different pieces of information throughout all the Sandarbhas are integrated and synthesized into one presentation in Jiva-Tattva. But you don't misunderstand it. It's the misunderstanding that causes the confusion, and then you'll start to pick one or the other. Okay? Now, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught Jiva Swarupoi Krishna Nitya Das. If a person says there's no fixed correlation between this Jiva here and that Jyotirang Sabut over there, which of course I keep saying it's not, but I'm just speaking in a Kanda Darshan, because the people who are opposing Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they have Kanda Darshan, otherwise they wouldn't be opposing. So you say this Jiva over here is the Vaibhav of Paramatma, but he's not related to the Vaibhav of Krishna. Then you have to say Jiva Swarupoi Paramatma Nitya Das. Right? You have to say that. That's his actual identity. But our acharyas don't say. They say Krishna Nitya Das. So even though he's the Paramatma Vaibhav, even at that time, he's still, his swarup is, that means his nature is that he's Krishna Nitya Das. The upadhis, time, the relation with the Paramatma, which is only a vision, a partial vision. Ultimately, he's related with Krishna, and that's his swarup, and it's there. And he exists for that. It's Jiva Dharma, his purpose. Then another one, very important, in the Mahaprabhu's explanation of the Atmarama Slok, there he says, Jiva Swabhav Krishna Das Abhiman Atmadeya Jnani Achadite Se Jnan. The Swabhav, the nature of the Jiva, is Krishna Das Abhiman. To have the Abhiman, I am Krishna's servant. But, now someone may say, no, that just means it's his Swabhav to attain that. Right? Because that's what they say. They say, yeah, the Krishna Das Abhiman, it's your Swabhav to attain it. It's something else. It doesn't mean that you actually have it. But Mahaprabhu said, Atmadeya Jnani Achadite Se Jnan. That knowledge of the Abhiman being Krishna's servant. Say Atmadeya Jnani is Achadite, is covered by Atmadeya Jnana, the knowledge that the body is the self. When you think the body is the self, then the Abhiman of being Krishnadas is covered. So those are Mahaprabhu's statements. So those are making a very extreme separation cut. The Paramatma is over here, and the Jiva is the Paramatma Vaibhava, and they're related, and this is over there. This is their Kanda Darshan. It's their divided Darshan. Because first of all, those divisions of time and space don't exist. And Mahaprabhu himself is confirming that. So in this way we can reconcile everything.
100 questions.
There are some other topics, like what's the relationship between a substance. You see, Samyog Sambandha is between two substances, but between a substance and its vritti, it's actually inherent, Sambandha. So is the Jiva if you're talking about the Jiva and God obviously is a Vastu. So is the Jiva a Vastu or is he a Vritti? Is Bhakti a Vastu or is it a Vritti?
Well, personified is right.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into that today. I have to write it all out now. It'll probably be another book. Okay, now I said, remember at the beginning, I said we can discuss this subject from 2 points of view. One from the point of view of Parabrahma and one from the point of view of Shabda Brahma. So this is super interesting. We've described it first in terms of the actual Swarup of Bhagavan and the Swarup of Paramatma and the Swarup of the Jiva. Now I want to discuss it in terms of Bhagavan's other Swarup, Shabda Brahma. So in the 11th canto, Sri Krishna says, Mayopa Brimita Bhumna Brahmanananta Shaktina Bhuteshu Goshu Rupena Vishesho Naiva Lakshate. Which means, the Veda, which is spread everywhere by me, who possesses many forms and who pervades everywhere as Brahman, and who possesses unlimited powers, that is perceived by the wise as Nad Brahma, within all beings, just as subtle as the thread, the fiber within the stalk of a lotus. So this is a discussion of Shabda Brahma. So the first thing that Krishna is saying here is that Shabda Brahma is everywhere. And that Shabda Brahma in the form of Nad, which is the subtle form of the Bij Om, the Supreme Lord has established it in the heart of every living being. So what that specifically means is, though Shabda Brahma is everywhere in its avyakta, unmanifest form, it becomes Nad in the Mool Adhar Chakra of every living being. And when the person, by mercy of a sadhu, engages in bhakti and begins to chant the holy name, then this Nad, Brahma, rises up from the Mool Adhar Chakra. That's on the level of Pran. And in the form of Pran, Aprakrita Pran, supernatural Pran, it rises up to the Manipura Chakra. Manipur Chakra. And now it's on the level of the Manas. And that's called Para Pasyanti. Then it comes to the level of the heart, the Anahata Chakra. And that level of sound is called Madhyama. And there it manifests actually with its Tatobhutri Brida Omkaro. And its three aspects, Om. And the Om vibrates within the heart. And then that Om reveals its Swarup as first Brahman, then Paramatma and Bhagavan. So that's how you realize God, by chanting the holy name. Just in brief. And I'll be explaining this next week. I'm going to Eugene, and the topic for the festival in Eugene is Nam Tattva. So we'll be going into all the details of this Siddhanta there. So, I won't go into all the verses, but just one verse is very, very important. Srinoti ya imam spotam suptashote sunyadrik yena vadvajate yasya vyakti akasha atmana swadhamno brahmana sakshad vachika paramatmana sarvamantru upanishads bheda-abheda-tattva sanatanam. So here, Sri Krishna is saying, it is the Paramatma, is the person who hears the syllable Om, which arises from the unmanifest Nad, when the senses don't function. That means, when a yogi, or any bhakti yogi, he's absorbed in samadhi and his senses close down, then the Nad manifests. Om. And who hears it? Paramatma hears it. But then when the Paramatma hears it, he wakes up the Jiva and he allows the Jiva to hear it. So then it says, by that Om, it manifests from the Jiva. Here Jiva doesn't mean it comes from the Atma, it means it comes from the Mooladhara Chakra. And then manifests in the Hridakash. So from the Mooladhara Chakra to the Anahata Chakra, it manifests in the Hridakash. The Vedas appear. This Om is the indicator of Brahman, which is its own shelter, and of Paramatma and Bhagavan. This Om contains all mantras and all Upanishads, and it is the eternal cause of the Vedas. So that's very, very beautiful. Sarva Mantra Upanishad Veda Bij Sanatanam. It's the Sanatan Bij of all the Vedas, all the Upanishads, and all mantras. And it's already there. It's already there. It said, Krishna said, Mayopa Brahmitam Bhumna, I have established the Shabda Brahma everywhere. So it's already everywhere, and in the form of Nad, it's in the Mooladhara Chakra. So because it's everywhere, the Shabda Brahma also pervades the Atma. But in the form of Nad Brahma, the Lord has made it there in the Mooladhara Chakra, then it manifests up to the heart chakra. Now we'll come back to the beginning of our class where we first quoted Srila Prabhupada. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Sadhika Bunai Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karya Udai. Pure love for Krishna is eternally situated in the heart. So what does heart mean? Prabhupada uses the word heart to refer to the subtle body, the chitta. Always, Chaito Dharpana Marjanam. The chanting of the holy name cleans the heart. So when Prabhupada uses the heart of the jiva, he means the chitta. You see? The subtle body. So, now, this bij is Brahman. Well, it's avyakta, it's unmanifest. But when it becomes vyakta, it becomes Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. So Bhagavan is only Bhagavan if he has Shakti with him. And what's his Shakti? Bhakti Shakti. Bhagavan is only Bhagavan if he's got his Vaibhavs around him. What is that? Paraka Swarup. Right? So we discussed the subject from the platform of, from the idea of Krishna Swarup. Now we're discussing it from the perspective of Shabda Brahma. Shabda Brahma is everywhere. It's specifically in the form of Nat, established in the heart of the Jiva. And when the Jiva chants, then it becomes, it's avyakti, becomes manifest. And what's there? Bhakti is there, and the Swarup is there. So now Srila Prabhupada's translation doesn't look so naive, does it? It just seems to be exactly the truth that a realized person might say if they were translating that verse. But that is the Nam Pradhan Paksha, if you like. Nam Pradhan Vichar. It is a deliberation on how the living entity attains Prem and his Swarup based on the understanding of Nam Tattva. So it's a Nam Pradhan Vichar. Krishna Prem is eternally situated in the heart, Abhyakta. They say, oh, well, if it's there, how can it be covered? It's not covered. You're covered. Krishna's not covered. Your experience of it is covered. It's a vyakta to you. And it becomes vyakta by Shuddha Chitti Karya Uday. As soon as the chitta is purified, then the nad manifests as Om, and then Om gradually manifests everything else. So Om is like the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the rasatmak group of Om. When Om becomes full of rasa, Om is a seed, and the Mahamantra is Madaram Madaram, Etam Mangalam Mangalanam, Sakama Nigama Vali Satvaram Chitsarupam. The Vedas come from Om, and Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the juicy fruit on the desire tree of the Vedas. You see? Like that. So in this way we try to reconcile everything from the perspective of Parabrahma and from the perspective of Shabda Brahma. Everything Srila Prabhupada wrote is 100% correct. Everything Srila Bhakti Thakur wrote is 100% correct. And there is no contradiction with Jiva Goswami.
Very quick. Please translate Upadan.
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 The word Upadan just means ingredient. The stuff that something is actually made of. So, if you make a cake, then the ingredient is whatever, raisins, flour, sugar, milk. Yes. So whatever you put in your... So the ingredients that you make something, that's called the Upadan Karma. Okay? So are we done? Is it everyone satisfied?
I have some questions.
Please come back.
Okay. No, if you have some questions, yes. Okay.
So,
I'm here to defend the thesis.
but in the context of the Jiva's unfolding experience, because a lot of the difficulty has not been around, because Gurudev used to also use the word constitution. When I had this discussion with Tulum Govinda Advaita and so forth in 2015, they gave the argument from Mukunda Prabhu, you're saying that somehow or another, in the constitution, meaning the physical makeup,
As an Upadan Karan.
Huh?
As an Upadan Karan, you mean?
No, but they were saying that they thought Gurudev is saying it's in the just subtle body of the jiva, then bhakti is there as a substance. So Swarup Shakti is there as a substance. So they weren't, so they weren't speaking of it in the context you're speaking. They're saying that Gurudev was saying it's there as a substance. So I said, no, it's there in the constitution. Now also Param Gurudev, in the biography, he associates constitution with the stage of perfection. So not just the makeup of something, but the actual stage of perfection, which you pointed out in the Priti Sandarbha verse, right? So in the unfoldment of the jiva, because in chapter 26 of Jiva-Dharma, Brajanath asked the question directly to Guru Goswami. He says, is the rasa of the jiva predetermined? And Bhakti, Guru Goswami answers, to this I cannot say yes or no. So that reconciles what you're saying, because he says, from one angle of vision, from the angle of vision, Nityavat Manaka, everything is present, everything is there. From the angle of vision of Prakat Kal, which will be Kanda Darshan, we're unfolding. So in the process of unfolding, Rupa Goswami Pad, Bhakti Vinod Thakur, Jiva Goswami Pad, they've all given the idea that in the unfolding process, it's coming from previous impressions, and this is how the jiva is realizing it.
Yes.
This is
That's
true.
correct, because that's what I'm saying. There's a pedagogical challenge
Right.
that you have to say something that makes sense
Yes.
to the experience of the person, what they're going through.
Yes. My Gurudev once to Maharaj, he asked the question in front of my house in 2008. Oh, Srila Gurudev, can the swarup of the jiva, bheda-jiva be changed? And Gurudev just retorted, like, not heavily, but very firmly, oh, the bheda-jiva is not realizing any swarup. What's the question of change? So, but, under the idea that it's there, it's fixed, and so forth, the answer to the question would have been no.
Yeah.
So why he gave the emphasis, oh, bheda-jiva is not realized any swarup, to perhaps give emphasis on the point of the actuality of the sadhak experience, that what you're going through, you can't automatically conflate. In the same way you explained, you can't conflate, oh, everything is there, I have everything already, so forth, so on. Because then maybe the seed of sahajavad will also come.
Yes.
It's true?
Yeah. That's one of the ways in which person, there's so many ways a person can become sahaja.
Gurudev, can you use the microphone?
Actually, the sahaja, prakrit sahaja bhav becomes present when the Shabda Brahma is intercepted or obstructed. It always comes. Because the actual path of bhakti is one of darshan. The path of bhakti is one of spurti. It is a spot dharma. Srinoti yaitam spotam. So hearing produces spot. The chanting, remembering, and that's bhakti. And so bhakti, pure bhakti is always like that. Sadhana bhavivo jaha siddhadayata bhava. Pako pakramata evicha. What you do in the stage of sadhana and what you do in the stage of siddha is the same. It's only a question of being unripe and being ripe. You see? So if a person is chanting and they're just like, Bhakti-Siddhanta Thakur gives you the arrows. If you're not having a spurti of something, then you're just like a hunter going in the jungle in the dark and just shooting arrows in the dark, hoping that he'll hit something. So if someone's bhajan is chanting, they got their eyes closed and they're trying to, just imagine their way into the spiritual world. They're just like a hunter shooting arrows in the dark. And that's not bhakti at all. Bhakti has realization from the very beginning, has realization. And if that spot dharma is not coming, the person hasn't entered into bhakti yet. They're still in the developing, their shraddha is becoming firmer and firmer. Their surrender is becoming gradually more and more, until their faith is very firm and their surrender is they're complete up to that point. Then they enter into pure bhakti. And then bhakti is always pratyaksha vagamam dhamyam. It's always a pratyaksh. So what the person is doing in his sadhana stage and what he does in the siddha stage, like seeing Krishna, serving Krishna, it's the same in sadhana and siddha. It's only one is unripe and one is ripe. So a person who is in the dark, who is not experiencing the spot dharma, they're not actually doing sadhana bhakti. So what's the question of doing raganuga bhakti? Raganuga sadhana bhakti. So, Srila Bhakti-Siddhanta Thakur said, when the Shabda Brahma, by hearing, is not manifesting in the heart, then when the person tries by their mind to imitate the experience of a person who is actually having the spurtis, then that is the Prakrita Sajja Bhava. Because they are Prakrita Bhakta. Sa Bhakta Prakrita Smita, and everything he's doing is Archan. Archame Vahareye Pujamya Sarayate Natat Bhakteshu Chanesu Sa Bhakta Prakrita Smritaha. And Srila Prabhupada's translation of that verse is amazing. It's like half of his translation is not even in the verse, because it's a Bhavanuvad. His Bhavanuvad is, the Prakrita Bhakta does not make a purposeful study of the Shastra to find out what is the actual standard of devotional service. And none of those words are in the verse. And you think, what kind of translation is this? But when you realize actually Bhakti-Tattva, then you think, Prabhupada's a genius. His translation is just amazing. It's perfect. Any other question? Ganesha.
Yes,
Ganesh.
you mentioned also as a prerequisite for Trinadapi Sunichena in context with what you were just sharing, it's important to understand this platform of Sakshit-vena, to be the witness.
Shakshitva.
Sakshitva. So that platform of being the witness as like almost a prerequisite for really to perform true bhakti.
It's not exactly, yeah, it's the prerequisite for Shuddha Bhakti, yes. It coincides with Trinadapi Sunichena. Of course it comes gradually, because then as the mind becomes steady, then you realize that you're not the mind and you attain Shakshitva. In the Yoga Sutra it says, Vritti Swarupyam Itarakta, that if the chitta is steady, then what happens? Then Surupa Vastanam. If the chitta is steady, then you realize your Surup, your nature. But Vritti Swarupyam Itarakta, if your chitta isn't steady, then you identify with the chitta vrittis. Your identity becomes blended in with them. So what will happen is, as you're chanting more and more deeply and the chitta vrittis die down, then you'll experience Shakshitva. Maybe a little bit for some moments. Oh, that's it. But then afterwards the chitta vrittis will come again. You see? So then there's a stage in your life where you're chanting every day and you spend more and more time in that state, and then that sanskar overpowers the other sanskars, that you remain in Shakshitva all the time. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur says the degree to which we are Trinadapi Sunichena, that we've attained Trinadapi Sunichena, the degree to which we are Sharanagat, and that by which we can measure if we've entered into pure bhakti, is Sakshitva. So there are degrees. And then when we attain the state of steady Shakshitva, then when we practice bhakti, then we don't have the ahankar of being the doer. You see, that's the difference. Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said, I don't want to associate with that person who picks up his mala like he's taking the reins of a horse. Right? Because when a person gets on a horse, they get the reins and it's like, I'm in charge now. So if you feel you're the doer, you pick up your mala, okay, I'm going to chant now, I'm going to do this. Hare Krishna, let's get it done. I'm in charge, here it comes. Hare Krishna. I'm chanting. So the name is Jiva-Din, it's under the control of your tongue. That's wrong. But once you attain the state of Shakshitva, you pick up your japa mala in a state of wonder. Now the holy name is going to come. And you're not doing it. Hare Krishna. You're not even chanting. Your tongue is chanting, but you have the experience that Nam is coming to you. Now you've entered into the beginning experience of Shuddha Bhakti. That's what it means. Srila Jiva Goswami Pad said that the ability to do Nam Smaran, to remember Krishna's name, depends on the Antakarana Shuddhatvam Apekshate. It depends on the purity of your Antakarana. So you can say to someone, what's God's name? What's God's name?
Krishna.
Krishna. What's God's name?
Krishna.
What's God's name?
Krishna.
So you all remember Krishna's name, right? So you did Nam Smaran, right?
No.
You see? So the word Smaran in Vidvat Ruddhi means one thing. And the word remembrance in your everyday vocabulary, you know, Sadhan Ruddhi Briti or Agya Ruddhi Briti, is two different things. Because Jiva Goswami said, the ability to remember Krishna's name, do Namsmaran, is completely dependent on the Shuddhata of the Antakarana. You see? So when Jiva Goswami uses the word remember, and when you use the word remember, they don't necessarily mean the same thing. So when you read in Shastra, it says, and now you remember this pastime, and so on. It's not talking about what you're thinking, yeah, I remember Krishna's name, I remember my mother's name, I remember my car's name. Like that, it's not that. That smriti is one vritti of buddhi, of intelligence. Our general memory when we use the word remember. So our buddhi has 5 vrittis: nidra, sleep, vikalpa, imagine, and one of the vrittis is called smriti, remembrance. And it means that you take some past experience which is stored in the chitta and you bring it to the forefront of your consciousness, and you do anusan, you investigate that impression of something you've experienced. But if you haven't experienced Krishna, how will you remember him? There's nothing you can only bring out your own material impressions. So then you're remembering your own material impressions. Right? So actual smaran means that when the chitta is steady, then there's a spurti of Krishna Nam in the chitta. You're not doing it. Krishna Nam is coming. That's Krishna Nam Smaran. So if the purity of the heart is necessary for Nam Smaran, then what about Rup Smaran? Parikas Gun Smaran, Parikas Smaran, Lila Smaran, and so on. So there's a difference between when our acharyas say, remember the pastimes of Krishna, and when the common person says, remember the pastimes of Krishna. And this is why, after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave so many instructions, after he left, there was so much confusion. So then Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, he had to speak on the subject of Vidvat Vritti Vritti. He literally said, he gave the definition of the Gaudiya Mat. He said, the Gaudiya Mat is the place of the descent of the Vidvat Vritti meaning of words. Because everyone's talking, but what they think they're saying the same things that the acharyas are saying, and what is written in scripture, but it's completely different. Because they're not speaking in Vidvat Vritti Vritti, they're speaking in Sadhan Vritti or Agya Vritti Vritti. So Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur would say, slow down, let's look at this. And so, though his teaching seems like really astonishing and like it came out of nowhere, it's actually the condensed essence of the epistemology of Bhakti given in Tattva Sandarbha. What's the meaning of Shabda, Aprakrita Shabda? How do we access the Aprakrita Shabda and everything? If you don't have your Tattva Sandarbha, essentially that means if you don't have your Gaudiya epistemology in place, you can misunderstand everything. And so the Kanishta Adhikari is always in that state of misunderstanding. And therefore he needs Sadhu Sangha of Madhyams and Uttams so that he can adjust his understanding to come to the Vidvat Vritti understanding and enter into pure Bhakti. And so the Vidvat Vritti understanding of Shastra is so heavy that someone with very soft faith, hearing it, they become depressed. It's like they just can't take it, it's intolerable. And so, Gurudev said, there's a Siddhanta for Kanishtas, there's a Siddhanta for Madhyams, and a Siddhanta for Uttams. And that's why we always have to be under guidance. Because in the beginning, Gurus say, oh, chant Hare Krishna, remember Krishna. Like they said, just encourage you. And as it becomes your habit and you become purified, come here. And then he gives you more instructions. Well, actually, you're not really doing bhajan, you're doing archan. Now it's time for you have to enter into Madhyam Adhikar and understand properly this path. Don't be Prakrita Bhakta forever. Gurudev used to say, you can't stay on the Kanishta platform forever. So then you have to enter into that. Then it's more challenging. But it's necessary in that stage. I spoke something on Vidvat Vritti on the morning of the second day in Miami. All the definitions of the different types of Vritti Vritti. So, okay, and any other questions? Yes?
There's this idea of the Swarup city, and as a young devotee, the way it was explained to me was far more simple than the information that's presented today. It's sort of like, in the spiritual world, we have an eternal form. Like maybe you're a gopi, or a cowherd boy, or a blade of grass. And so this conversation very much was connecting to that for me. And you spoke about, really, really interesting, the idea that there is this fixed Swarup, and it's very interesting. Even Krishna knows everything, so even though there's still a path allowing for free will on one's journey, there is this particular form. And so that's really what my question is about, this idea of a particular form. And is this rigid? Like, so my Guru Maharaj, I've heard different people say, oh, in the spiritual world, he's a gopi. Someone else writes a whole paper, no, in the spiritual world, he said this and this indicates he's a cowherd boy. And I'm kind of like, no, the form that manifests, so to speak, the form of a gopi or a blade of grass or whatever the form may be, whatever that conscious form may be that's being experienced, I'm questioning. I'm not going to say I know, I'm not going to say I've argued, but I'm not really comfortable with the idea that it is a specific thing that somehow for all this other eternity, someone's locked into this one thing. And I guess for me it's a little more, I appreciate your smiling, a little more abstract and flowing. It's just like Krishna, Bhagavan, but you know, Krishna he has so many different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the material world, we experience different relationships of friendship or parental or conjugal.
Yeah.
So the languaging sometimes feels very, all of a sudden, like constricting and putting into this rigid box, like on this, when the idea of actually being servants of Krishna or servant of the divine is a much bigger table, smorgasbord for us to experience, so to speak. And we don't lose these different types of relationship experiences as we become perfect. Does that make sense, the question?
Yes. The thing is this. Bhakti is about attaining Prem. So there's a level, you can go to Vaikuntha, where you can see the Supreme Lord manifesting so many different forms. It's not limited in any way. You can show so many forms. And you also can have a swarup that you can change at will. You can adopt any form you want. Right? So that's what you were talking about. So yeah, that exists. It exists in Vaikuntha. But that's a very low level of the spiritual world. Because that is an experience of Aishwarya, opulence. So that's when you are not limited to any one form or experience. Now it becomes Aishwarya Leela. And though you're not limited to that form or experience, but you're limited in the experience of love. Your love experience is limited. The highest realm in the spiritual world is Madhurya Leela. And that is human-like pastimes, where Krishna doesn't know that he's God, and no one there knows that he's God. They all think that they're human beings. You see? Because as soon as you know that Krishna's God, then he's actually not hungry, so no need to feed him. He's not hot, so there's no need to fan him. He's not tired, there's no need to massage him. You see? As soon as there's a knowledge of opulence, then the bhakti, the intensity of the love goes down and becomes overshadowed by awe and reverence. It's all amazing. Whatever. But the love is evaporating. So, in the realm where the love is the highest, Krishna's he's hungry, he's tired, he's thirsty, he's worried. I'm worried about him, what might happen to him? So there's a constant anxiety all the time. And so then the possibility of love becomes unlimited. But it can only be unlimited if you have one form like a kind of limited human being. So, that's what you are calling a limitation isn't a limitation, it's the precondition for experiences unlimited love. And what you're calling unlimited is the precondition for the contraction and the limitation of Prem, actually. So everything is upside down. And that's explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 4. Aishwarya Shitila Prem Nahi More Preet. Aishwarya Janeti Sab Jagatam Isrit. Aishwarya Shitila Prem Nahi More Preet. Krishna said that all the people of the world, they worship me in a mood of opulence. But that kind of worship, the love becomes weak. And it pleases me, but I'm not fully satisfied. I'm pleased by my mother, who thinks that I'm hungry and is trying to feed me more. I'm pleased by my friends who defeat me in wrestling and then I have to carry them on my shoulders when I lose. I'm pleased by the gopis who abuse me with harsh language. So this, you have to assimilate the concept of the relationship between Aishwarya and Madhurya, and how Aishwarya limits love, but Madhurya gives a situation for unlimited love. And last night we were discussing that, the unlimited, how this love, it's just because your swarup is one sense kind of limited, that's called parischinna. It's not, but at the same time it's vibhuta, it's everywhere. Because Krishna is everywhere in all the universes, and your swarup will be with Krishna in millions and millions of different universes. It's just that when you're there, you feel like a human being. And you don't know that you're even present in the other one. Each manifestation of you won't know about the others. Because if you did, it would be Aishwarya. So these are not so simple things to understand.
I have a question. But
So yes, if you think that your Guru has one Sarup, that's the best, that's the absolute best. I know that my Gurudev is a particular Manjari. And she's not anything else, and I don't want to be anything else. And that one apparently limited form gives access to such unlimited love. I told on the first day Jiva-Tattva. What did we discuss on the first day Jiva-Tattva? That when the Manjaris look through the whole of the Kunj and they faint in ecstasy, the joy that they feel, the ocean of joy that they feel cannot be compared to even one drop of that ocean of joy that they feel cannot be compared to all the arrangements of Ananda that God Himself experiences. So what you're saying about a limitation, this is completely wrong. It's completely wrong. By having one Swarup as a Manjari Swarup, then you experience millions of times more joy than God Himself, who is actually unlimited. And we explained this on the very first night here, at the end of going through Jiva-Tattva from the beginning. Gradually then we came to that, the aspect of the higher glory of the Jiva-Tattva.
Sorry, Prem, I had a question for you concerning what you were discussing here, which is that don't you think that in that Madhurya Ras, it's like a little bit going beyond the beyond, in other words, considering that is for very advanced the Bodhisattva, and we ourselves consider that when we are at that level where we consider that we are in that Ras.
Yes, of course. Why? Why should you consider you're on that level if you're not on that level? You should only consider that you're on the level that you're on. If you're Kanishta Adhikari, I'm a Kanishta. If you're Madhyam, I'm Madhyam. If you're Uttam, then you don't think about these things. You're just drowning in brain all the time. So of course, no one should think like that. That I am on this level. I don't recall ever telling anyone that you have to think that you're on that level. But you should know that that is the level of Rupa Goswami. That is the level of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That is the level of Srila Gurudev. And that is the level to which they are inviting us by their causeless mercy. And that we can one day, in some distant future life, if we always cry out to Rupa Goswami and Swarup Damodar Goswami, our acharyas, after some lives, we'll attain that level by their mercy. Is it clear?
Oh, one time you were going to work on one book, and of course in Gaudiya theology, in this line, it is considered that only becoming Nitya Sakhi is only available position in Madhurya Rasa. But in Vallabh Sampradaya, others, what is the situation there? Is it like Swakiya or is it like Priya Sakhis? Because in Ujjalimani, it mentions that those who came into the heavenly planets, they were Priya Sakhis, but they're all Nitya Siddha. So there's no...
There were already expansions of the Priya Sakhis in the first place.
Yes. So there's no scope for... And there's no Anugati in our line to become a Priya Sakhi anything anyway. But, so there is no position in Madhurya Rasa except being Nitya Sakhi.
The spiritual world, as Prabhu was pointing out, it's very vast and unlimited. And so there are different prakashas. There is Braj, the original Braj. And then there is the Vaibhav of Braj, that is called Golok. So in the original Braj, there's pure Parakya Rasa. Completely pure Parakya Rasa. And in Golok, there is and there's a Madhurya, pure Madhurya there. And in Golok, there is Aishwarya. There's knowledge that Krishna is God in the Golok, the expansion of that Braja. And there is a Swakiya mood as well. And in between that Golok and Braja, there are so many other prakashas as well, which are mixtures. Avivikta Swakiya Parakya. Indistinguishable Swakiya and Parakya and so on. So, in regard to other Sampradayas, their conception of the spiritual world is different. For example, let's say Hitari Bang Sampradaya, Radhavalavi Sampradaya. Kahu Swaki, Kahu Paki, Kalahari Matavagi, Bhagat Rasik, what is that? Yugal Bhagavad Rasikaki Nityananda Anadi. It means that he's saying, some people speak about Swakya and some people speak about Parakya. This is just all quarreling, useless quarreling. Because the Jugal, the divine couple, Jodi Bhagavad Rasikaki Nityananda Anadi, that's what he said. Jodi, that means the divine couple, they are meeting together forever with no beginning, middle or end. So, if your conception is that Radha Krishna in the Kunj forever, they never leave. So there's no cows, no cowherd boys, no Madhya Yashoda, no, right? It's just Nitya Nikunja Nila, Nitya Milan. Then all these kinds of considerations about, about any other pastimes or anything. And they don't have any groups. They have no groups either. There's not Chandravali's group and Bhadra's group and other groups. There's just all the gopis are there. And they're all Sakis. They're just all Sakis. There's one category of Saki and there's no groups and they're all serving like that. So different Rasik Sampradayas, they have their idea. There's no separation. In the Vallabh Sampradaya, they don't have Nitya Milan. They have an Astakali Lila also, like us. So the cows are there, Madhya Yashoda is there and everything. But they don't have a conception of groups of gopis. But there are different, there's Radhika and then there's her Sakis. So they don't have an idea of different groups.
Is it Radha Dasan? Those Sakis are all Radha Dasan? But they also want Sambhog with Krishna?
In the Vallabh Sampradaya, it's all Dasis. They call Sakis, but they're all serving. They don't meet with Krishna, with Krishna themselves, just arranging for Radhika to meet. So Radha Krishna's Nitya Milan going on in just one place. So actually, their entire bhajan pranali is Mantramaya Upasana actually. They think it's the highest. They say, oh, Ananya Rasik, one-pointed Rasik, not one-pointed in one relationship, one-pointed in one ras in one place. It's just like, just Radha Krishna meeting in that one ras. That's what they mean by Ananya Rasik. But actually it's Mantramaya Upasana. So our Swarasik Upasana, the Astakali Lila, where it goes from place to place. So they also have Astakali Lila in the Vallabh Sampradaya. But it came about, there's nothing about the Astakali Lila in the writings of Vallabhacharya. But you know that due to the attack of Muslims, Gopal Srinathji came and stayed in Mathura, in Satkara. We went there on Brajvana Parkrama this year. Please try to come to Braj and Parkrama. You'll go to so many places that you have never seen before. So Satkara is the house of Vittalacharya, and Raghunath Das Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Lokanath Das Goswami, and Raghunath Bhakta Goswami and others, they stayed there for a whole month with him. And then Vittalacharya, the son of Vallabhacharya, he began to write about the service to the deity in Astakaya Lila. So it seems that actually our Goswami is influenced because Vittalacharya, he used to serve Raghunath Das Goswami like his guru also. And so, before class every day we say, Shama Sundar, Shikanda Sheka, Smerahas, Murali Muranoha, Radhika Rasika Mama Kripanite, Swapriya Charana King Korim Kuru. So this is prayer for Radha Dashan. Who wrote it? Vittalacharya, Vallabhacharya's son.
Wow.
That's not even, that verse is not even from our Sampradaya. I mean, technically speaking. But that's what people say now, but according to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Gadadhara Pandit gave Diksha to Vallabhacharya, so it is our Sampradaya. The whole Vallabh Sampradaya is our Sampradaya. But if you go in Braj, they want to always agree to that story. But we have great love and friendship with, even today. Because Vallabhacharya, when he was already a Acharya, but when he came to Mathura, there he met with the Acharya in the Vishnu Swami line, and he took shelter of him. And that's when he got introduced to all the Braja Rasa. And that's why the Vallabh Sampradaya is considered being the Vishnu Swami line. And I was just there. Who came with me before the Parikrama started? We went to Mathura. Were you there? And we went to the Gopal pit. So that's the original pit of Vishnu Swami from thousands of years ago, the Gopal pit. And we met with the Acharya, the 84th Acharya in the direct line from Vishnu Swami. And they say their Sampradaya is a Bhagavad Guru Sampradaya. Right? So I don't think Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur started it. This goes back before Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya, their line. You can go there and speak to the Acharya. And that's the line in which Vallabhacharya, he took shelter when he came to Braja. So the categories that we have, Nityasaki, Pranasaki, Prasaki, that categorization even, and the groups of gopis, these categorizations are Gaudiya. You don't find them in the other lines. You know, I spoke to, because I have very close friends, and one of my Shiksha gurus in the line of Vishnu Swami and Vallabhacharya, from whom I learned their Siddhanta. And, you know, I said, but our Gaudiyas, we have different groups, and the Praman is there in Srimad Bhagavatam. Upagiyamana Udgayan, Vanita Shatayutapa, Vibrad Malam Vaijantim, Vyacharan Bandanam Banam. It's in the Rasalila when it said Upagiyamana Udgayan, that Krishna and the gopis are singing. First Krishna singing, then gopis are singing. So it's the original Samaj Gayan, Sankirtan. It's the original Sankirtan, it's there in the Rasalila. And it says there, Vanita Shatayutapa, that Krishna is decorated with the garland of Vaijanti garland, and he's wandering and beautifying the bank of the Jamuna river, and he's surrounded by Vanita, young ladies, Shatayutapa, in Shatayup, in hundreds of yutas. So there's the Praman, because all our Gaudiya Siddhanta is based on Bhagavatam. So there's the Praman. There's not one group of gopis serving Krishna. There are all these different groups. And of course the different Pramans come in. When Krishna reappears from the Rasalila, then how the gopis receive him. Some take his feet in their lap, some take his dumbbells, some take his arm on their shoulder, some are standing far away. And so all the different mentalities of the different yutas is meant, but it's not openly described. So Java Bhagavata Vaishnavastani, Ekanta Shaikaro, Chaitanya Charan. Unless you come to the Gaudiya line, cannot know what Bhagavatam is actually saying. Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said, whatever rasa is in all the other rasic sampradayas in Braja, it was like an overspill from associating with Gaudiyas. To all my friends in other sampradayas, my pranam. Don't get angry with me, but and it's very interesting because, you know, I also I learn a lot of verses from in Braj Bhasha, Braj Bhasha verses, and I always see, not always, but I only use the Braj Bhasha verses which have a mool in Sanskrit in our Goswami's literatures. Like yesterday I quoted that Prem ju kahita manpurati kam kahata ang angabhyapatrete tako kahata anang. When Prem is in the heart, love is it's called Prem. But when it manifests as an activity, it's called Kam. And when it pervades every pore of the skin of the whole body, every limb, then it's called Ananga. So then I gave the Praman from Rupa Goswami, Varamrita Sarupa Sri Swasarupam Manonayat. How the Mahabhav becomes one with the mind, the vrittis of the mind, and overflows into all the prans, and then the body becomes a Mahabhav Sarup. So that's like, so the Braj Bhasha version and the Sanskrit version like that. Very interesting, because Raghunath Das Goswami said, Guru Goste Gostai Su Sujane Bu Sujane. What does Sujan mean? You should have deep love and attachment with the Vaishnavas of the other Sampradayas in Braja and the Brahmins of Braja. So if you live in Braja, because many people kind of live in Braja, just go to Logosara and MBT. But if you really live in Braja and, you know, make a deep friendships with the Brijvasis of the other Sampradayas, then you can understand in life practically what Raghunath Das Goswami is saying there. We stay in our own Sampradaya, but there's something special in that. So it's in the beginning of Manashiksha. And Srila Gurudev was like that because he always used to make the Dharma Sabhas and invite all the Vaishnavas of the Sampradayas to speak. And they used to come every day in Mathura as well. to meet with Gurudev.
But nowadays there's a Guru Nishta bully, so we gotta be careful.
Yeah. I'm that in that battalion or whatever called. What is the group of policemen called?
I don't know. Oh, battalion. Oh, yeah. Battalions or
Battalion, right? Yeah,
squad or something.
Squad, yeah. I'm not in that squad.
What?
You know, if you associate with Vaishnavas or other lines, you're not going to get squatted. That it really, if you come on a parikrama, Chaitanya can be parikrama. We'll go to many places. The big parikramas they cannot go to because it's just logistically impossible. Like in Navadvip parikrama, we'll go to the house of Jaga and Madai, the house of Lakshmi Priya Devi, the place where Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur met with the Surya Devi, the sun god, the place where Bhaktivinoda Thakur had darshan of the Rasa Leela and saw his own swarup of Kamala Manjari, the place which are the Navadvip analogues of Pushkar, Naimisharanya, Kurukshetra, the palace of Lakshman Sen, where Jayadev Goswami and the other poets go, Acharya, Doi, Kavi, Shrutidhar and everything, where they go, the birthplace of Sachimata, house of Nilambar Chakravarti, and so many places. And it's not hard work, we have vehicles, so we maximize Kirtan and Harikatha in each place and then quickly go to the next place. Like this. So, please, if you can, try to join us for Navadvip Parikrama, and then immediately after that we go to Braja, and then in Braja we'll also have some parikramas, and I always take the devotees to meet with the acharyas and great sadhus from the other lines as well, and have Harikatha together, to continue that experience that Srila Gurudev used to do when Gurudev was in this world.
Give us blessings so we can all come.
All the blessings are with Gurudev. What do I have? My pockets are empty. I'm just following Gurudev.
You already touched on it to some extent, Prabhu, but just since you mentioned that on the process of Smaran, it's not something we can force ourselves into. We can't force the former pastimes of Krishna into our mind. So then, before we've reached that stage where we are getting those sporties, what practically is our practice to actually, I guess, develop that or invite? Again, I don't know if it's something we cultivate or if it's something that we just kind of invite and wait for it to descend. So yeah, how do we practically reach that stage of receiving those sporties?
So first of all, one should try to chant and hear the holy name. Srila Prabhupada used to say, hear, become clear. Once the devotee said, when I'm chanting, my mind is going here and there, what should I do? Prabhupada says, you chant with your mouth, you listen with your ear, what does your mind have to do with it? So Srila Prabhupada was very heavy on this point. Now Srila Gurudev, mainly he was preaching to devotees who've been practicing for some years. So he used to say, you can, in your mind, you can go to Govardhan, give pranam at the place, you can offer flowers to the deities. You can worship Thakurji in your mind. You can choose a verse, like, Bhajan Rahasya is full of verses. You can choose a verse of Bhajan Rahasya, go through it systematically like this. Or Venu Geet, or Bhakti Rasayan. And you chant Hare Krishna and then stop and then say that verse, whatever it is. Bande Nanda Brajestrinam Pararenam Vishta Sahaya Samharikadut Gitam Punati Puna. And then again, Hare Krishna. And deliberate. Good said that. But even this is like, it's not religion, it's our chant. Because the thing is that unless you have a habit of, if you're not in the habit of chanting a lot, and you're committing namaparad, basically chanting will be so dry, like walking through a desert, and you won't increase your chanting. So Gurudev would know the art, how to encourage people, and say, oh yes, you can chant and you should do this. This was to encourage it, to get them in the habit of chanting more. Chant more and more. You can remember some verses, so chant more and more. And increase. Then when you increase to, 32 rounds, 48 rounds, 64 rounds, like that, the influence of the name will become, make the mind become very peaceful. And so then you go into Siddhanta. I've written one book, it's called First Aid for Chanting the Holy Name. Have you seen that book?
I have not, no.
Okay, you try to get it. So in this book, I identified 15 problems that a devotee has when he picks up his japamala. 15 things which are immediately there. like not recognizing that the name is a person, being preoccupied with your worldly situation. There's so many inattentiveness, wandering of the mind, so many things, impatience. It's like 15 problems which are there. Generally, they're very common. And then I compose one verse in Sanskrit. And in this verse, there are 10 solutions that solve these 15 problems, all in one verse. So it's just an adjustment. That's what's called first aid in chanting the holy name, because actually to chant purely you need sadhu sangha or pure devotees. But still, there's something you can do. You can adjust your attitude in relation, adjust your position in relation to the bheda-abheda-tattva of Nam, so that you can gradually give up 10 types of Nam aparad as well. So you can read this, it will help. And to be situated in Shakshitva, to know that you are Kalatit, your soul is beyond time, so don't worry about time. Don't be impatient. Drishya means that you are seeing. Don't think you can see God and see Krishna and see the name. That you are being seen by the name. And Vastu Shakti, also that the name has Vastu Shakti, his own power. You cannot know the name by your power. Prabhu has to manifest his own Shakti to you. So these are different things. One part of the verse, Jivanasando, means that Gurudev said all bhajan takes place in the junction between life and death. In other words, when a devotee is really doing bhajan, he feels like, I'm going to die without Krishna. And I'm going to die just now. And one of the characteristics of the moment of death is there's a humility comes, because you're so helpless. And that humility causes a surge in bhakti, in the path of bhakti. You see? We forget that. We pick up our mind, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So I've written one verse that reminds you of all the things. You should think, I should chant as if I'm going to die today. Shastra says that religious activities should be performed as if Yamaraj has already grabbed you by the seeker. You're about to die. And educational activities should be performed as if you're going to live forever. Right? Let's say someone decides, I'm going to, study Bhakti Swami Sindhu and Ujjwala Nilamani. It will take years. So if you think you're going to die today, you'll never do it. So when it comes to education, you should always think, I will live forever, when you're doing educational pursuit. But when you do bhajan, when you do your chanting, your worship, you should, I'm dying right now, I'm about to die, Krishna save me. Okay. But we don't do that, we don't have that urgency. So I've composed something in such a way to remind of the metaphysical aspects and also the components of our mood when we chant. And if you chant like that, then you won't have to remember anything. You'll just be so desperate and crying to Krishna that you'll start immediately, the reciprocations will come, and the sporty, Krishna's form, his beautiful lotus feet, and your heart will tremble. It will come very, very soon. But for those persons who, they still have so many obstacles and everything, Gurudev has encouraged, in your mind you can do parikrama, go with that, you can do this and that. So, Yagi Krishna Nam Karibai Sadhu Sangha Karo. Jagannatha Pandit said, if you want to chant pure, you have to do Sadhu Sangha. Without Sadhu Sangha, Namakshar Bahirai Bhati Nama Kabulnai. Only producing the syllables, external syllables, this is not the holy name. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Nasta Prayishita Bhajeshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Serve the book Bhagavatam and the person Bhagavatam as well. And by this, Nasta Prayishu Abhadreshu. All inauspicious things, there'll be. Prayation is almost destroyed. That means realization will come while you still have an artha. This is the meaning. But when the anarthas are mainly destroyed, but there's still some anartha, but realization will come anyway. But here, abhadrani, the inauspicious things, if you look at the Tika, Vishwanath Thakur said it means nama parad. So without serving the Vaishnavas, the Bhakta Bhagavats, we will not develop the sensitivity, the intensity of purpose and the clarity to give up our nama parad. But as soon as you give up nama parad, nishta hoila upajoy premarataranga, the waves of love start to rise up in the heart. Taramaji sarvashastra nama sankirtan, niraparad nan laile, pai prema dan. If you chant without offense, prem comes. So that means here prem means Shuddha Bhakti. This Ruchi, Asakti, Bhav, and then Prem. Like this.